Hi everyone, welcome to the second of our Land at Lunch sessions. I am Gemma Campbell, I'm the Land Rights and Responsibilities Manager at the Commission, and I'm joined today by my colleague James McKesson-Leach, one of our policy and practice leads, and Lisa Busby, who is our training coordinator. This is the second in our Land at Lunch series, and the title for today's session is How do you find out about the ownership and use of land? So we've got 45 minutes today to chat you through the programme and what we're doing, and it's going to be a quick session, just a bit of hopefully useful information on where you can look to find out about who owns land and what they're doing with it. But before we get into the content of today's session, I am going to stop sharing my screen and bring in Lisa to talk you through some housekeeping.
Thanks, Gemma. And hi everyone, thanks for joining today. Yeah, we've just got a few pieces of information in housekeeping to share before we begin. So first of all, as you'll have seen on our holding slide, we are recording today's webinar, including the chat and the question and answers. So information on how the recording will be used and our full privacy policy link is being posted in the chat right now. There you go. Also, everyone's camera and mic today are off by default, but we welcome your questions in the Q&A box and comments in the chat box. Have a look at the bottom of your screen to be able to enable those and use those. Questions in the Q&A box can be asked anonymously if you'd prefer that, but just so you know, your screen name is always visible in the chat. In today's session, we also have the option for you to turn on closed captions or a live transcript. Again, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the CC button on the control panel. And we would flag that these captions are auto-generated, so there may be some inaccuracies that are outside of our control. And finally, we're going to be collating some feedback today throughout the session in the form of some short Zoom polls. And we're really grateful for your input into these. The polls are completely anonymous and we won't share the answers to the entire group. And in a moment, I'm going to post some info on how we use this data into the chat. But if you have any questions at all on any aspect of this housekeeping, please just go ahead and pop them into the chat. So here we go. It's time for you to get involved. Before I hand back to Gemma, I'm just going to launch our first poll. There are 4 very quick questions for you, and you just need to scroll through to access and answer all of those. So let's launch that. I'll just give you a few minutes to take a look and give us some answers.
Great to see some of those responses coming in. We noticed from the last series that we did have quite a lot of new folk joining us who haven't been to a Commission webinar before. So I would just say, for those of you who aren't as familiar with us or don't know who we are or what we do, we are a non-departmental public body. We are governed by 6 commissioners, including a tenant farming commissioner, and we are based up in Inverness. So we work on policy and practice across various aspects of land reform. And here we go. So hopefully you can see my slides again. So just to talk you through what we are going to be doing. The overview for today. So James and I will be talking you through some different aspects of how you can find out about who owns land and buildings. We'll hear some interesting information from James about ownerless land. And we will talk about where you can find out what is happening with land and buildings. This is some very high level kind of introductory level information, but there might be some things that you haven't heard about before, things that you don't know about. And a lot of the information that we will be talking about today is can be found along with additional signposts and information in our information for communities map, which just sets out some of the different categories of information and where you might look. We also have an information map for landowners to help them find out how they can find out about their communities. So that's the source of information for today. So just to kick off, find out who owns land. So James and I will talk you through some of the things you can see on the screen here. So our first point of call, usually when we are looking for information about land, is Scotland's Land Information Service. It's the Land Register. This is held and managed by Registers of Scotland. So this is a great online searchable register where you can go to find out information about property owners, property prices, find documents relating to property, and check if a property is indeed registered. Registers of Scotland offer some really helpful guidance and advice around this, and it's a fantastic way to find out about what's happening. You might be familiar with some of the title sheets that you see. You might want to go and look up your own house, which is probably everyone's first port of call when they look on ScotList, but it's a really fantastic way of finding out a bit of information. And you can also zoom out and have a map-based search, and it's quite fun to explore. And of course, the Land Register is the more up-to-date Land Register in Scotland. There is still work ongoing to complete the register and to get all of that information available digitally. And I will pass over to James to talk to you a bit more about its predecessor.
Thanks, Gemma. So, as Gemma was explaining, the Land Register is perhaps the more modern digital version of the work the Registers of Scotland do. But land registration in Scotland has been going on for several centuries, in fact, all the way back to the 17th century when the Register of Sayscenes was first created. So for a lot of Scotland's land that hasn't changed ownership or changed hands over the past few decades, those records are still within the paper Sayscenes record. And that provides the answers to questions around land ownership for those titles that haven't changed hands for a number of years, if not even longer. It is a paper-based register, so it does require specialists to access it and to dig around and find the information you're looking for. So it's not quite as accessible as the Land Register through ScotList is, but it is one of those sources. It is an ultimate source of land ownership, at least as it was historically. Tracing modern land ownership from a Sayscenes title is sometimes slightly challenging because people may have, and families may have well died out over time. Likewise, companies that may own land on the Sayscenes may have dissolved or been bought over or whatever over the intervening years. So sometimes those records aren't as up to date as they could be, but they will give you an indication of who at least the last clear owner was, and there's a bit more detective work potentially in some cases to find out who the modern owner is.
Thanks, James. So another form of register for land that some of you might be particularly interested in if you're living in the crofting counties is the crofting register. So this is another free to search public register of crofts, common grazings and land held in Runrig. And again, it's something that you can go and search online, and there is a link to that in the information map that Lisa shared the link to. There are more than 20,000 crofts, so it's great to see that information. Registration is required on a crofting register in the case of certain trigger events, and it's something where voluntary registration is also really encouraged. And I know that a lot of grazings committees have come together to register their land at the same time, and so it's a really useful source of information if you are in one of these crofting areas. I will pass over to James now to tell you a bit more about the next one.
Yeah, so Registers of Scotland, aside from being the home for the Land Register and the Sayscenes, also provide a number of services and in fact hold a number of other registers that are potentially of interest and use in your quest to discovering ownership. So they can provide help in terms of interpretation, particularly for Sayscenes, but also for Land Register titles, to understanding what the information provided on those titles is. And as I say, they contain a number of other, or they hold a number of other registers as well, some of them quite historic, but also some of them more interesting as well and modern. So depending on the particular site or building that you're looking at, sometimes they can have quite complex titles with things like burdens and servitudes and other types of rights from neighbouring landowners or property owners. And their services there are able to kind of provide a bit of guidance on what that actually means, who's actually responsible for different things, and who has rights of, say, access or or whatever it might be. So not just about kind of ownership per se in a kind of plain sense, but also about all the kind of rights incumbent and giving you some support in terms of interpreting what titles actually mean. And of course, one of those things potentially is around value, but Scottish assessors are the people who look for value. And I'll pass back to Gemma to talk a wee bit about that.
Yeah, so the Scottish Assessors Association website is where you'd want to go if you were looking for information about perhaps the valuation rules, about the rateable values of different properties and information about non-domestic valuation and rates, and about council tax information for different properties. So there's some really useful functions and information on the Scottish Assessors Association website. You can search by address or by postcode and get a bit of information about what's happening there, and perhaps some information around ownership. And the Scottish Assessors Association also published some really useful statistics and information. So it's a really good, again, online resource for finding out a little bit more, even if it is just having a nosy at what your neighbour's council tax code is.
Yeah, and so kind of touching back on some of the stuff we've mentioned around particularly the SACENS register and some of the gaps that might appear. Those of you who are perhaps more familiar with land reform in Scotland may be familiar with Andy Whiteman, who may even be in the audience this afternoon. But he's put together a website called Who Owns Scotland that tries to fill in some of those gaps, particularly from SACENS records, and provide an up-to-date picture of land ownership within Scotland. So although that comes with caveats in terms of kind of the up-to-dateness of the data based on when it was last available and when it was last clear, again, it's another useful resource potentially for a small fee to get some at least up-to-date or as up-to-date as possible information on land ownership in your area or particular estates or sites that you're looking for. So again, another really useful resource there, but like in SACENS and to a certain extent the land register itself, there are potentially gaps and some of the information requires a bit of interpretation as well.
Thanks, James. Another point, if you've gotten this far through some of the things we've spoken about and you're maybe still looking for a bit more information, relevant authorities can be a great source of information. There was a requirement introduced under the Community Empowerment Act 2015 for relevant authorities, which are local authorities, other public bodies, health boards, police and fire service and others to put together, maintain and publish a register of assets and to make that available online. So if you think about the different kinds of public bodies who are operating in your area, you should be able to go onto their websites and find these registers of assets, find out about which buildings they own, what land they own in the area, and in some cases, you might be able to find out a little bit more about what they're doing, whether the asset is vacant or in use or being leased. And there are a couple of authorities who have done some great work to make their own personal registers map-based and interactive, so you can have a little scroll around and find out about where the different assets are in your local area. So that's another really helpful and interesting way of finding out about what's going on. And I will hand over to James now to talk to you about what happens if you can't find an owner for land.
Yeah, so although it can be quite difficult and quite complex to trace an owner, particularly if you're relying on SACENS records, you may end up coming to a dead end where the last owner has deceased without heirs, potentially some decades ago, or it may have been something like a limited company that has dissolved again, potentially some years ago. And that means that there is quite literally ownerless land. This is slightly different from what people might assume in that the Crown is the ultimate landowner in Scotland. There is no ultimate landowner in Scotland, unlike south of the border. But the Crown does have a first right of refusal on the ownerless land, or technically bona vacantia, that comes to its attention. And it can choose to exercise that right of first refusal or not. In the case that it doesn't, then the land in question or property in question essentially is open to a claim from whoever decides that they have a relevant interest in it, or whether that interest is just they quite fancy owning it. So it's a really interesting kind of area, and we do quite a bit of work, particularly with the Kings and Lord Treasurer's Remembrancer, who are the public body tasked with exercising the Crown's right. I realise all that is an incredibly complicated thing just to try and encompass within one bullet point. So I will say, we are actually having another webinar, particularly with the KLTR on ownerless property and their proposed property transfer scheme towards the end of this month, which I think, if I just double check, it is. Yeah, so Tuesday 29th at 12, we'll be having a session with the KLTR specifically on ownerless land, and particularly options for communities and others who are keen to make better use or bring that land back into productive use. So that should be an interesting session. If you want to really get into the guts of ownerless land, then I'd recommend you join us for that one.
Thanks, James. And those of you who are particularly eagle-eyed might notice that in the bottom corner of this slide, you can spot Culduffel Woods, and there's a really interesting story there with Culduffel Woods, and we have a case study on our website if you'd like to find out a bit more about their journey with ownerless land. We've had a really interesting point in the chat, so thanks very much to Angus Yarwood, who has said that he's used companies' house searches to find the people involved with companies that are listed as owners of land on the land register, and that is a really really useful source of information, so thanks very much, Angus. We're now going to move on to talk about finding out a little bit about what's happening with land. So I'll just move the slides on and kick off with talking about the different places where you can find out about what's going on. So these are some of the sources we might look to if we're looking into issues, and the first up is local authorities. Local authorities obviously have a massive remit and are really involved in various aspects of land ownership and management, and are responsible for delivering a really wide range of services. So they're involved in delivery of education and the estates, the school buildings that are required to do that. They are involved in things like waste management and environmental protection, and things like economic development and how buildings are owned and used, as well as obviously planning, which is a massive part of finding out about what plans are for land and buildings. Of course, some local authorities make use of arm's length external organisations, or ALIOs, and they might use them to provide services or manage assets. So there might be some different sources you would look for information there. And local authorities are a great first point of contact when you're looking at things like common good assets, looking at local planning applications, what planning is being sought in your area, looking for the decisions around those, and of course local development plans, which I will touch on in a second. But first I'll pass over to James, who's going to talk about finding out about particular designations on that.
Yeah, so broadly, designations fall into two kind of main categories for our purposes. So there's those around kind of nature, which people will be familiar with, and those around kind of historic environment. So starting with nature, Nature Scot, formerly Scottish Natural Heritage, or SNH, provide the SiteLink website, which provides information and easy access to data on everything from protected areas across Scotland, local, kind of natural heritage, up to national and international designations of importance. So there's quite a lot there in terms of the nature side. On the historic side, Historic Environment Scotland have a portal that allows you to search for records and maps for designations, schedule ancient monument type things, as well as applications and decisions that are made about those particular properties. More broadly, Historic Environment Scotland also run the Canmore database, which is a catalogue of Scotland's archaeology, building, industrial, maritime heritage. It's compiled and managed by Historic Environment Scotland, and it provides more background information on the historic nature of the site, its previous uses, owners, any kinds of information of historical or local interest can potentially be found through the Canmore database there. And all these things obviously play into the development of local development plans and community plans, but I'll pass back to Gemma for a bit more on that.
Sure, yeah. So local development plans set out a long-term vision for where development should and shouldn't happen in an area. And they are put together by local authorities with various stages they have to follow and consultation at various points in that process. There are, of course, changes coming soon to local development plans following the Planning Act 2019. But local development plans are a great spot, a great source of information and providing out what the potential uses are for land. And of course, these link in with community plans, and another aspect of the Planning Act 2019 that is to come soon is local place plans. And these kind of plans, community development plans and local place plans, will look at what a community's priorities are for the place where they live, and what their priorities are, what their plans are, and what they would like to see happening. And you can find information about the community plans from for example, development trusts in your area, or from community landowners, or from local and in some cases more regional or sub-regional groups who are interested in the development of an area. They tend to publish these on their websites or share them through social media, and they're a really helpful way of finding out what other people in your community think about land and what activities might be coming up. And of course, some of these plans for communities, again, we've done a bit of work with communities on vacant and derelict land, and sometimes communities might want to see these sites, even if they're quite small sites, brought back into productive use. So I'll hand over to James to tell you a little bit about the vacant and derelict land register.
Yeah, so one of the things that the Commission has spent quite a bit of time on previously is on vacant and derelict land. And one of the key tools for finding vacant and derelict land is the vacant and derelict land survey that's compiled by the Scottish Government. So what the survey does is it asks every one of Scotland's 32 local authorities to have a look around their area, to look at sites that are potentially meeting the definitions of vacant and derelict, and to register them, and with a bit of information and history as well. So you get a flavour for what the site was. So a lot of vacant and derelict land, particularly in the central belt, is post-industrial. So you're potentially looking at things like or issues around contamination that may be a block to development or to further reuse. So that sort of information is obviously kind of vitally important for communities or for anyone who's interested in bringing land back into productive use. It is regularly updated, I think, every couple of years or so, or certainly has been recently. And it is a useful source to find, because the other thing that it does is it links to, or local authorities have the option to link to their aspirations for the site as well. So as well as providing a bit of the kind of the history and the background and the reason as to why that site might be vacant and derelict, there's often a bit of a positive story as well, where the local authority is suggesting or potentially making ideas of how this could be brought back into use, and to give a bit of steer to communities or developers or anyone else who's interested in taking that back. One of the other things that can be used, particularly on vacant derelict land, is a Part 3 community right to buy. And of course, that links quite nicely to some of the work around right to buy and the register of community interest that Gemma can quickly brief us on.
Sure. So a great way, if you're interested in finding out what local community organisations are interested in potentially purchasing in the future, is to take a look at the Register of Community Interest in Land that is maintained by Registers Scotland, along with the Register of Applications by Communities to buy land. And that links into what James has said there about a Part 3A application under the Land Reform Act, which is the community right to buy abandoned, neglected and detrimental land. Part 5 comes under the Register of Applications by Communities to buy land, and that relates to community right to buy land for sustainable development. So when communities submit an application for interest, those documents are shared on the register. You can have a look and see the proposals that are being put forward, and you can see representations that are made by different interested parties, and you can see the outcomes of the decisions that are made. So it's a really helpful way to find out what's happening or what's planned for different sites in different areas. And of course that could, those rights apply right across rural and urban areas, and some of those more rural areas might be sites that would be particularly suitable for forestry. So that leads me nicely into James's next point on forestry open data.
Yeah, thanks, Gemma. So as people will no doubt be aware, there are big moves at the moment to expand tree planting, to expand forestry within Scotland, all for good reason. But sometimes people feel that information on this can be hard to find. But fortunately, there is a forestry planning system, and Scottish Forestry have an open data website that provides a range of information on forestry grant schemes and options, plans and felling operations, surveys and inventories, as well as looking at things like climatic site suitability, and a whole range of different information on what land might be suitable for which type of forestry, whereabouts it is in the country, whether there are any applications ongoing, and perhaps what some of those longer term forestry plans are as well. So a wealth of information through Scottish Forestry Open Data website can again be a bit technical, but if you're really interested in seeing what's going on, particularly in terms of afforestation in much of rural Scotland, then well worth a look there and a dig through the information that they provide. They also do have a handy map viewer as well, so it can be easier to navigate through that system rather than scrolling through a lot of data. So yeah, well worth a look if you're particularly interested in forestry in Scotland at the moment.
Thanks very much, James. So that's the end of our slides for just now. So I will stop sharing, and we will be able to have a look at the Q&A. So if you do have any questions about where to find information about land, or about any of the things that we have mentioned while we've been talking just now, please do use the Q&A function and let us know what you're thinking. Of course, there's a lot of the information that we've been talking about today is links quite closely in with one of the principles from the Land Rights and Responsibility Statement, which underpins a lot of the work that we do at the Commission. Transparency of land ownership and land use decision making is a really important part of land reform, and there are lots of different sources of information, and it's really helpful for people to know where to look for these things and how they might be able to use them. So going to the chat, we have had a request there from Anne for the links there to be emailed. So thanks, Anne. We will look at sending those emails out. And a lot of the links that we have are in the information map and are available on our website. So do check out those links. We have had a question in from William Nelson about asking us to expand briefly on what changes are meant to come after the 2019 Planning Act. I feel like that could be a webinar all on its own. Hello everyone, we seem to have hit a technical snag with Zoom there. I think that everybody has come off there, but I can see that quite a few people have come straight back in. So sorry about that. Right, so we did have a question come in. We were just about to get to when we dropped off there. So we lost you at local place plans. Sorry about that, William. I think we were still seeing you at that point. So we were just saying that local authorities will have to have regard to local place plans when they are taking forward local development plans. So we do have a question in, thanks Annie, and Annie's interested to learn whether the Scottish Land Commission are approached by communities who need access to land data, and in turn, what type of data are communities seeking? So thanks very much for that. We do get inquiries in from communities who might be looking for different sources of land or information about land. It tends not to be so much data focused, I don't think. It tends to be more about kind of local issues, and sometimes about knowing what information they should be able to access. So I think that's something, if there's anything in particular you're thinking about, please do pick that up with us. And I've got a bit of activity in the chat now. So yeah, we've also got a request in now for a registration link for the upcoming webinar with
KLTR.
KLTR. It's a recent change, so we are still getting used to that one. But yes, I'm not sure if that's live on our website yet. But we can get that once we've got that shared set up.
Yeah,
we can share that information.
And the other thing, of course, is to keep an eye on our social media channels, because we will promote the webinar with the KLTR through that. And also, if you haven't signed up for our newsletter already, then please do so, because you'll get all the information through there as well.
Yes, and the events page on our website is also a great source of the webinars that we're doing, and we've got all of our land at lunch sessions on there, and that's where we put our information about our different public meetings. The next one of those is on the 16th of November, I believe, and is particularly for the Western Isles. So I'll be there with some of the commissioners to answer your questions about land reform in general. So just have a look, and I don't think we've got any more questions coming in, so just have a think. Oh, there's always one when you need prompts. We've had a question about whether community councils have particular access beyond an individual or fee access to data mentioned in the registers. I'm not aware of community councils getting that particular access, but I suspect that it's something that would vary on a case-by-case basis. I'm not aware of any local authorities providing that kind of access or funding that kind of access for community councils, but it could happen.
Yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head, so I'm not sure that how much support community councils get in that regard at the moment.
Yeah, and we've had a comment in, I think that is from Andy and Whitman. Thanks very much for that, Andy. That's
of course the registers. So in theory, every local authority should have a register of their common good properties. I think most of them now do. I think some of them certainly do. There are still a few gaps, I think, and that is potentially a work in progress in some cases. But yes, that's a useful thing. So particularly for common good assets, often kind of iconic heritage items or buildings. And often green spaces and parks, things that have been around in a lot of places for a long time, quite often tend to be common good. So worth having a look on local authority websites for the register of common good assets that should be there.
Yeah, in some cases I think it's difficult for the solicitors to really make a decision on whether an asset is common good or not, depending on the title deeds and how things were gifted. But you should be able to access that information, and if it isn't on your own local authority's website, then please do ask them for that information. And Andy's also mentioned landholding maps published by deer management groups. That's a really really helpful one, and some more links there too. So that's great. Thanks very much, Andy, for that. So I think that is us. We've got one more coming in, and we'll deal with this one, and then Lisa has got I will hand over to Lisa to finish off the session. So is there anywhere to see historic common good land that was sold off? And I think that's a fairly straightforward answer.
Which is not easily, no. I mean, if you're willing to dig through the records, then that would be the way to find out. But at the moment, I can't think of anything that's particularly easy or convenient to find, I'm afraid.
Thanks, James. So we'll bring Lisa in. I think she should be back with us.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Gemma. I am back. That was quite an exciting moment when I dropped out. So well done, everyone, for weathering that storm. I'm not sure if it was the storm here that caused the problem, but thanks for bearing with us, and well done to Gemma and James for continuing throughout with answering those questions under difficult circumstances. I just want to thank everyone so much for their contributions in the chat, in the Q&A box. I know we're getting quite close to the end of the session. Some people have given us feedback in the chat already, which is fantastic, but I'm going to launch a poll now, just super quickly. Again, I think there's 5 questions in here. Let me get this launched so you can start. this is about the webinar today and what we've covered and how we've presented it. And the feedback you give us means that we can continue to shape our series and make these useful for the people that attend. I can see that people are starting to complete it. Thank you. Suddenly I thought, oh, the poll hasn't worked either, but it has. Amazing. I can see that we've had some great additional content in the chat around links, around signposting. Of course, we've got our route map, our information map for communities online, and we've got a number of links in the chat, and people have asked for those links. So we're going to compile an email and send everything across to everyone that's been shared in terms of resources today. So thank you to, I think it was Anne who asked for that. I'm going to be quiet now and let you complete the survey for a few minutes.
Thanks very much, everyone. And I should say as well, if you have any particular issues in your own communities, if you are encountering something that doesn't fit with the land rights responsibility statement and our good practice protocols and guidance, then please do get in touch with us and you know, for a chat. If we feel we're able to help you, then we can get involved there and yeah, try to help you find a resolution to the issues you're facing. And even if we're not able to help you, it is always really helpful to have the information and to know what the issues are, to help us identify where future policy options might help and where additional support might be needed.
Fab, Gemma. I've popped the contact details for the good practice team in the chat. I've also popped the link in there to join our mailing lists. And also, not trying to spam the chat, but I've also popped the links in there for the next session in the Land Lunch series, which I think, Gemma, as we are now nearly at 92% on the poll, I'm gonna end that if everyone's happy. Oh, I can see things are happening still. 95. Are we gonna get to 100? Can we make it? Nearly. Thanks, Gemma. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So our next event is in 2 weeks' time, Wednesday, 16th of November, online at 12 p.m. Hopefully they have as much time with us with the tech side of things, but Emma Cooper and Karen Grant will be with you on the 16th to talk about community access to land and about the routes to collaboration that are open. So there's a bit more information about that on the events part of our website, but it will be a really interesting session. So please do join us if you're available. And I think that is all from us today. So that's great. Thank you very much to those of you who joined us and those of us who rejoined us after our tech difficulties, and hopefully see you at a future session. Cheers.